So my name is Marcy Stoll. I'm here to help you if you have any technical questions or difficulties. Today we're using the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we have saved some time at the end of our presentation to share your questions with our experts. So if you want to submit a question, you either click or tap the question button on your device, type in your question, and it's submitted right to us. If you need any assistance, my email is up there on the screen right now, and it's also in the reminder email that you received an hour ago. So please reach out if you need any help. And thank you for being here. Dave, over to you.
All right, Marcy, thank you so much. I appreciate you handling the technical aspects of this webinar as always. And I'd like to extend a welcome to all of you who are able to join us today for this, our sixth in the series of webinars focused on supply chain disruption during COVID-19. My name is Dave Freyer, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Outreach and Engagement in the Broad College of Business here at Michigan State University. And I'll serve as your moderator for this session. I'm assisted today by Nick Little from the Center for Railway Research and Education, and Marcy Stoll, who you've just met from our Executive Development Programs team. Wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards via the Broad College YouTube channel. Today, our discussion is going to focus on supply chain sustainability and some of the considerations and recommendations for how organizations can move forward successfully in this space, even as we continue to respond to and deal with the challenges of COVID-19. Pleased to be joined today by two of our experts from the Broad College of Business and the Supply Chain Management Department. Dr. Vedat Vater, a McConnell Chaired Professor, who's going to provide some opening remarks for us, and Dr. Han Zhang, Assistant Professor of Supply Chain, who's going to provide some of the research perspectives. Also joining us today, pleased to welcome two incredible industry professionals with diverse experiences and backgrounds in specifically the sustainability area. Ying Liu, who is founder and CEO of Blue Lake Packaging, and formerly a Senior Director of Product Operations and Corporate Social Responsibility with Apple, and Bing Cao, who is co-founder and managing partner of Blue Lake Packaging and was formerly Associate Partner and Solution Leader for McKinsey & Company. Our format for today is going to involve the panelists sharing some of their key insights and responding to questions. We certainly welcome your questions and would ask you to please put them in the Q&A area here in Zoom, and we will address as many of those as we can as we get to the end of the initial remarks. And so to get us started, I'd like to invite Dr. Vater to provide us with some of his opening remarks. Vedat, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the nice welcoming remarks. I wanted to start by thanking our panelists today, Ying Liu and Bing Cao, as well as our researcher from the department, Han Zhang, for making this a reality. This will be the last installment of the webinar series this year. And hopefully next year we are going to continue the webinars, but maybe it will not be entitled Supply Chain Disruption Amid COVID-19. Hopefully the title will change. Out of these 6 seminars, there were a average of 150 people attending each seminar. So we're guessing that about 1,000 people, these seminars reached about 1,000 people. We're thankful to that audience who made this seminars possible and enabled us to translate some knowledge from academia to the practice. Now, today's seminar focuses on sustainability, and hence is quite relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, particularly Goals 8 and 12. In the next slide, I will comment briefly on the question of why do firms engage in sustainability. Obviously, there is the triple bottom line concept that is gaining traction about the people, planet, and the profit. while in some cases, firms engage in sustainability under pressure from the legislator, or they just see a profit opportunity in a number of cases, and they again engage in sustainability. Next slide, please. Now, here's an example of the potential benefits where the Chamber of Commerce came out with a report, a recent report about the benefits of circular economy for the Great Lakes region, where we are also located. And you could see that the economic benefits and the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions could be quite significant even if we only focus on steel, plastics, and pulp and paper. Those are the prevalent industries in this region. Next. So if there are all these profit opportunities, why is there a need for legislation? And this is actually an ongoing debate, but it seems that legislation could lead to rationalizing the consumption of virgin materials, divert returns and end-of-life products from the landfill, and particularly lead to the design of environmentally friendly products. So sometimes the incentives that the firms have by themselves may not be sufficient to have them engage in sustainable operations, and therefore we see in a number of countries, including Europe, Japan, and Canada, as well as some states in the US, legislation actually mandating these activities. Next, please. So what are if you look at a policy perspective from the regulator, which is my own research area, you would see sort of three different paths where in Europe, the mandatory requirements are set. That's more popular. In the US, it's believed that markets will clear all the issues. And of course, Canada is somewhere in between. They don't want to be as market oriented as the US, but they don't want to push the industry as much as Europe does. So therefore, you see some hybrid policies in Canada. Next, please. Now, when I say the policy in US, I want to dispel the understanding that this is a monotonous structure. It is not. Actually, environment is dealt with in a very different way by each state. So you could see the difference between California, for example, and which happens to be the most liberal state in this topic, and others. And every state is at a different level in terms of the environmental take-back legislation. And so therefore, if you wanted to operate nationally across the United States, then you will be dealing with these different types of implementations of environmental take-back legislation. And of course, the question becomes, well, which legislation should you target in terms of satisfying? Next slide. Now, in the European Union, the requirements could be some stipulated targets or take-back legislation, particularly in the areas of hazardous materials, packaging, end-of-life vehicles, and electrical and electronic equipment. And interestingly, the original directive of WEEE was conceived as a way to incentivize companies to produce more environmentally product designs, but everyone was able to satisfy the stipulated targets by simply recycling the collected materials, and therefore the WEEE was recast in 2002, try to better incentivize reuse. Next. Now on the North American side, price-based incentives include taxes on the use of virgin materials, recycling subsidies, advanced disposal fees, and deposit refund requirements. All this is to say is that there is a portfolio of mandatory requirements or price-based incentives that are available to regulators to actually play in this field. And in the next slide, which I believe is my last slide, is where I wanted to highlight where supply chain management comes into the picture. The relationship between policy choices and economic impact is well studied by environmental economists. But where supply chain management, meaning our department, comes into the picture is where you take a policy choice, you go through an implementation stage and observe the producer's response, which leads to economic impact. So it is that sweet spot in the middle and the micro level implementation details, operational details, where supply chain management comes into the picture. So in that light, I would say in the next slide that that the fruitful avenues in this area are, looking at the still looking at the product designs that are environmentally friendly, and how do we actually legislate that or incentivize that. So these are my overall opening remarks for today's session. I'm going to pass the baton to Han Zhang, who is our youngest professor in the department, and who is about to lose that in a couple of months by the joining of a more recent hire as an assistant professor. He does work on sustainability in supply networks, and he's going to provide us some brief remarks on his own research perspectives before we go to our panelists. Han?
Thank you, Vedat. Well, thank you for this opportunity to share my research perspectives to a broader audience. So when we think about sustainability in supply chains, we typically consider two aspects of it: the social sustainability side and the environmental sustainability side. On the social sustainability side, we consider things like human safety and welfare. This could be for the employees, for the consumers or stakeholders. We consider community development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and animal welfare even, and other issues. On the environmental side, we consider things like pollution. It could be from harmful chemicals or waste, carbon emission, deforestation, and other things. Of course, these areas are not mutually exclusive. For example, global warming and pollution will have societal consequences. Society where people struggle with basic livelihood will not spare the resources to protect the natural environment. Now, as supply chains extend into global supply networks over the last couple of decades, sustainability became increasingly important for the firm. So as supply networks may take different shapes, leading to different structures of competition or cooperation, and consequently different sustainability outcomes, as researchers we're interested in understanding how the structure of the supply network affects the sustainability outcomes. And once we understood the mechanism, we can then ask how to account for such effects when devising corporate policies and public policies to achieve sustainability objectives. Next. One case in point is the issue of conflict minerals, which I have studied. These are minerals that are mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, that are used to finance conflicts within the region. These are the deadliest conflicts since World War II. Since the late 1990s, at least 5 million people have died because of the conflicts. These minerals include tantalum, tungsten, tin, gold, and cobalt. And Congo produces a substantial share of the global output of these minerals. For example, more than half of the global output of cobalt comes from the DRC. And this problem is not just important because of the scale, but also because of the prevalence of these metals. They're used in wide-ranging industries. We're familiar with gold used in jewelry or tin used in tin cans, and tantalum is using capacitors present in every phone and computer and every electronic device we use. And tungsten is used in machine tools. Cobalt is used in rechargeable batteries that are getting more important with electric vehicles. So because of this prevalence to curb the war groups, we really need a holistic approach throughout the supply network. Next. There have been external pressure from both NGOs and regulators to ask manufacturers to trace their sources and avoid those that finance conflicts. There are a number of NGOs working in this area. And on the regulation side, in the US, there is Section 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Act. In the EU, there is regulation on conflict minerals. The idea is so that the manufacturers can conduct due diligence audits on their supply chain to trace the sources and make sure, well, to the extent possible, that their suppliers respect human rights and do not contribute to the conflicts. But this is often easier said than done. So there is a peculiar feature in the mineral supply network that brings challenges to this, to the practice, to the implementation. There are many mines upstream in Congo and elsewhere that produce the ore for these metals. And there are also many manufacturers downstream in wide-ranging industries, as I mentioned earlier. However, in between them, there is only a small number of smelters in the midstream of the supply network that can convert the ore into the metal that the manufacturers can use. In fact, there are only a few hundred smelters for these metals in the whole world. So they form a pinch point in the midstream of the supply network. For the manufacturers to trace their sources, they must know the sourcing decisions of the smelters as well. As a result, these smelters are also where most of the auditing effort is targeted at. The existence of such a pinpoint entails many challenges. For one thing, each smelter was sourced from many mines because, well, there are only so many smelters. This makes it harder to trace the source. And also, it doesn't help that once the ore is smelted, it's all mixed together. From the downstream perspective, each smelter will be serving many manufacturers downstream, which means each manufacturer only uses a small quantity of the metal, not enough to exert influence over the smelter as an individual manufacturer. On the other hand, if each individual manufacturer were to audit independently, then a smelter would be undergoing multiple audits a year, leading to audit fatigue. So to understand these challenges, we build a model of the mineral supply network. In our paper, Curbing the Usage of Conflict Minerals, we study what actions the various parties will take when the NGO or regulator pressure the manufacturers. We find that the actions the various parties will take depends on the combined volume of what we call the compliance-prone manufacturers. So these are manufacturers that are most concerned about being compliant relative to their cost of compliance. In the paper, we develop guidelines for regulator NGO to target certain subsets of manufacturers. We also find that once the combined volume of compliance-prone manufacturers exceeds a critical mass, without other interventions, a shortage of conflict resources will arise, rendering further pressure on the manufacturers less fruitful. So these results call for other mechanisms beyond pressuring manufacturers. One such mechanism we saw in the industry is that a group of manufacturers came together to form an industry alliance to address the conflict minerals issue together. They were able to devise a consistent auditing protocol and conduct joint audits on the smelters. This means collectively they will have greater influence on the smelters. It avoids duplication of efforts and spreads the cost of auditing and compliance. And also it avoids smelters suffering audit fatigue, since now the audits will be joint. This organization is the Responsible Minerals Initiative. It's currently it's the most successful industry-led effort on conflict minerals. And we found that these industry alliances for a shared social responsibility goal are not limited to conflict minerals. We see them in the ethical sourcing in pharmaceutical supply chains, safe working environment in garment factories in Bangladesh, for the humane treatment of farm animals, and for the procurement of renewable energy, among other areas. As researchers were interested in how such alliances are formed and how companies can successfully form an alliance to work on a shared sustainability initiative. Previous slide. So to do this, we wanted to dig deeper into the workings of the Responsible Minerals Initiative. what we found was that a key driver behind the success of the initiative was the initial audit fund. So this is a fund that pays for the initial audit of smelters, and it is entirely funded by corporate donations. There were 5 initial donors who launched this fund: Intel, Apple, GE, HP, Microsoft. And over the years, there were dozens of subsequent donors that also contributed. One salient commonality among the initial donors is that all of them are like some of the most valuable brands in the world. So we conjectured that the brand value played a role here, and the sequence of the donation played a role in here. So to understand it further, we conducted lab experiments to observe how an industry alliance may form between companies with different brands, different brand values to work together on a shared sustainability initiative. Next slide. We find that forming an alliance is indeed the key. So it significantly increases companies' efforts in a shared sustainability initiative. We also find that the brand values do play a role. So companies seek to ally themselves with companies with well-known brands. And in addition, we also found companies with well-known brands tend to be reciprocal toward an alliance formed by other companies, and hence would contribute more. So this is something even while a company without a well-known brand can leverage as well. While in the case of the initial audit fund, the 5 companies that inaugurated it has some of the most valuable brands in the world. We find that companies not as well-known can also make a difference by initiate an alliance by inviting contribution from other better-known brands. That's all I want to cover. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. Really appreciate those comments, and sounds like some really exciting and valuable research you've been engaged in. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Wanted to shift gears a little bit. Obviously, with the setup that Dr. Werter and Dr. Zhang shared with us, we really need to kind of step back and understand the totality of the sustainability space. And obviously, there are a lot of myths and a lot of challenges and issues that we're all facing. And really wanted to invite our 2 colleagues, Ying Liu and Bing Cao, to share some of their thoughts and experiences in the sustainability space. And so I would invite them to offer some comments on the supply chain myths, challenges, and opportunities for us. Ying and Bing?
Thank you, David. I think I will get this started first. So hello, everyone. My name is Ying Liu. I definitely want to emphasize I'm actually a graduate from MSU with an MBA degree back in 2000. So MSU, I'm a proud Spartan, and MSU was the beginning of my supply chain career. So today, we're super excited to share our experiences and viewpoints about sustainable supply chain. To compact so much in 30 minutes is nearly a mission impossible. So in today's webinar, we hope we can provide a sustainable supply chain framework and some thoughts for people to think about. Next slide, please. So here is a framework we created. We call the Path to Sustainable Supply Chain. I think oftentimes we heard the terms like circular economy, sustainability. We heard the things like plastic pollution, climate change. And also for those people who probably have read your own company's sustainability report or corporate social responsibility report, you probably understand some of the concepts already. And also for those people from the 11 states, as what Vendit actually pointed out, some states have already have regulations for extended producer responsibility. So what exactly all these terms mean to us? Here's a chart that we're hoping to show the cause and effect. So basically on the left-hand side, there's a problem statement. So climate change, plastic pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, all of these are the problems and challenges that we're facing today. And the middle part, legislation, the corporate responsibility, the social responsibility, and the consumer advocacy is really the means to how we can solve the problem. And on the right-hand side is the UN sustainability goals the 17 goals that I think Wendy introduced 2 of them earlier today. Next slide, please. In the COVID time, basically, I think we have seen, for those from the industries, we've seen the demand is rising, but the supply is still lingering because I think there interrupted output, and also there are a lot of delayed capacity expansion due to the COVID last year. So the result we're experiencing today is rising prices in the raw materials, and also there are a lot of uncertainty in the production future. With regard to the waste recovery when it comes to sustainability, we have seen on one side, the COVID generated a huge spike of use of PPE materials, which in most cases are fossil fuel-based materials, which are not recyclable or compostable. And on the other side, just due to COVID, actually recycling in many areas have been halted. So the volume of landfill has increased substantially. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So when it comes to material selection, I think we often see that people think if we use a recyclable material, that means those materials should be environmentally friendly and be recycled. So here is a chart that I found interesting that in a local waste treatment center, they basically distribute and educate the residents about what's recyclable and what's not recyclable. However, in reality, next slide, please. Here's a report from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. As you can see, out of all the materials that listed being recyclable, in particular, I want to point out plastic. The recycle rate is only less than 9% back in 2019, and is expected to be much lower in 2020 due to the COVID. Next slide, please. So another challenge, I think, or I would say sometimes a misconception is the word zero waste. And people tend to think if something is claimed to be biodegradable or compostable, then that means zero waste. However, if you look at the requirement, actually, not that many materials actually meet that requirement in terms of what can be break down in a short period of time. So for instance, there's a test done by an NGO. Next slide, please. So for home composting, so they picked 4 different types of biodegradable materials and then did the test themselves after 8 weeks and 25 weeks, as people can see what materials have been broken down and what have not. Next slide, please. So here is another chart that people may have already seen in the ocean debris, what kind of materials can be decomposed over time, or basically the time that requires to decompose these materials. What is now shown is the bioplastics. Based on various reports, if people Google search bioplastics, you can really find, I think it varies from material to material. There either could be as short as 6 months or as long as over 50 years. And next slide, please. So I'm sure by now everybody acknowledges the environmental challenges we're facing. And but we tend to think we're now short of talented people, and why after so many years of petitioning and legislations even, we still see the issue is getting worse instead of getting better. And also I recently read a report, 90% of the carbon dioxide emission comes from the supply chain, because if we're really taking into consideration of raw material extraction, manufacturing, packaging, transportation, warehousing, distribution, even consumption and disposal, I think, I wasn't surprised to hear about that. So when it comes to supply chain design, I think as a supply chain practitioner, I first think about time to volume, time to market, and I care about the cost. But at the same time, I really think sustainability environment should be one of the key factors when we design supply chain. then who should we ultimately count on to transform the existing supply chain to a more sustainable supply chain? Is that going to be government, enterprises, consumers, or research institute like MSU? I think people have heard the word holistic. I cannot agree more with regard to, we need to promote more holistic design and execution for sustainability. And also today, if we look at what the problem is, there are a lot of recyclable materials are now being recycled due to the lack of infrastructure. And also, probably later on, we're going to talk a little bit about the standards and how we're going to measure the performance. But even today, if you look at all the top 5 reporting frameworks, people probably won't be surprised to see there's still a lack of measurement and also benchmarks. And funding is another challenge. Basically, I think last year, BBC published a very comprehensive report pointing out there are $400 trillion have been poured into the expansion of fossil fuel supply chain. However, there are only $2 trillion have been invested in recovery from those fossil fuel products. So I will leave it there for now, and back to David.
Thank you, Ying. Certainly no shortage of challenges, but I really appreciate the framework that you've helped us paint, really put the pieces together with a way to think about it. And so obviously, as supply chain professionals, one of the things that we're all interested in is, okay, now how do we take these challenges and turn them into significant opportunities? And so I'd like to kind of hear some thoughts on what can we do to turn these challenges into opportunities for improving impact, especially related to sustainability in the environment.
Yeah, excellent. So in terms of opportunities, we definitely see there are more and more attention to sustainability. We see more, 90% of S&P 500 companies are having some sort of reporting structure already for sustainability or environmental issues they're facing. And at the same time, I think there are more and more demand, even from the consumer point of view, and people really asking for more sustainable products. At the same time, we're working with research institute and universities like MSU and other universities. We found like people are paying attention to the innovations and material breakthroughs. What kind of things can we really replace some of the existing products and solutions we're having? And how about the product exit? How we can make people the products really exit friendly? And also we see they're definitely increasing funding from both public and private into material research, into the transformation of supply chain. I will leave it, for now, and Bing has actually more details to share.
Thank you, Ying. First of all, let me just also thank David and Vedette for convening this wonderful event. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. So with the frameworks that we have laid out, looking back to the extremely unprecedented 2020, I think one thing that we all walk away from it is our capital market had become a stakeholder capitalism, and that word had been used, manywhere. So if we take apart all of these stakeholders and take a look at where they all come from, then perhaps we can come to some possible suggestions for the way forward. Next, please. So this is a very, based on a McKinsey report that surveyed a number of large international companies, the branded companies, as Dr. Jiang had mentioned before. So I wouldn't really zoom in too much on the specific numbers, but I think the takeaway is the top 3 from sustainability value at stake is regulation and reputation. It could be benefit and risks. There's the rising operating costs, and there's the supply chain disruption. So this is a report actually predated the pandemic. So you can see in the past decade, these three issues had always been on the top of the executive's mind for value at stake from sustainability. Next, please. So from corporate to investors, this is a report from the Global Sustainable Investment Review. So they have published 5 reports so far, and the latest report is going to come out soon. So when you look at globally, Europe versus United States versus Japan, Canada, this actually match very nicely with Vedette's policy studies. So from an investor community, you can see for the US, which is the aqua color, a large chunk of US investment has gone to sustainability themed investing. Now, what does that mean? It's actually extremely controversial. Themed means companies have placed in their PR, right? So you could have clean energy as the theme, but you could be a company with just the idea, or you could be a company that won't profit in 10 years. And all of them are lump summed in this themed investing scheme. So if you look at the publicly traded companies and all the ETFs, right? So there's the solar energy, there's the batteries, there's the EV cars. You can't really pick and choose, but you can just look at the money move from one sector to another. And a lot of the resources, undoubtedly are being wasted because people don't know what's the best way to measure and track the innovation, which is what we badly needed here. Next, please. So from a consumer, let's switch gears to consumers. Many consumers in the survey had mentioned that they are willing to pay high green premium to a certain extent, especially for, so packaging stand out. This is actually surveyed across companies and consumers and across industries. So you can see the orange line of packaging stand out and lead the pack, whether it is 10%, 15%, 20%, up to 25% in packaging. So, this really makes you think, what should the company, how should the company make decisions in terms of, adapt to sustainable packaging versus other products? Next slide, please. So this page is what I wanted to use is an example of one company. And case in point, I've chosen Philip only because they have a latest S&P Global ESG rating come out. Now, with every rating, we all know the numbers. There are a lot of things going behind the numbers. So, but the structure is interesting, right? So as I mentioned in the investment slide before, there's no good way to track a company's sustainability, right? One company's UN goal alignment can be very different from another company. And which industry alliance you participate also can be very different. Right? And even in the same industry, if you are manufacturing, let's say if you're innovating in business model versus you are innovating in supply chain management, the measurement can come very differently. So, but people have to go with something, right? And this is one of the most popular S&P rating system out there. It's, pretty much it's either S&P Global Rating Report that people count on, which so far has 9,000 companies participate, or it is MSCI. And both of them are aligned with UN goals. So if you look into this report, it has 3 dimensions, environmental, social, and governance. And you can see Philips is doing particularly well on their greenhouse gas emission with a leading status, and waste and pollution also with a leading status. And the example behind that is they actually started participating in the Circular Economy Alliance back in 2014 and pledged 2018 to lead that effort. And what they did is they really engaged all the way with their suppliers. And an example, that can really move the dial is how do you really calculate the impact, the environmental impact, right? So if you calculate it from the time that you receive it from your supplier versus if you calculate cradle to cradle and full life cycle analysis can pretty much change the business decision from yes to no, depending on, what you use. So that's why, Blue Lake, with our own example, is trying to fill that gap, because what we see is many companies with complex supply chains with thousands of suppliers really has no way to track life cycle analysis for their tens of thousands of SKUs, right? And if you have to do it product by product and engage with all your suppliers, that job is insurmountable for the limited number of people in your sustainability department, to be honest. And that's where Blue Lake comes in. So what we see is we see this vacuum, or you can call it valley of death, between innovation to implementation, right? We understand, in many university labs, people have worked decades with a meager, assistant professor salary on weekends because they're passionate about the environment. They're passionate about something. And on the other hand, there are these brands and manufacturers who is really trying to make a difference, but they just don't have the resources to track them down, to scout the technology. That's why, at Blue Lake, we think Industry Alliance, as Dr. Jiang mentioned, is a great way. We see many success cases with Industry Alliance. And then the incubator is another great way. And then, if we think about all the large companies, including our clients that are struggling with this, how do we bring funding to match with opportunities? How do we measure the likelihood of success when you're looking at the research from assistant professors, right? Government is not known for the most efficient management of funding. I think that is the pushback that comes back to a lot of initiatives that has a dollar mark of billions and trillions of dollars. So that's why we really call for the thought leadership from the people who do it best to bring together both academia and policymakers, as well as the industry practitioners, because only when we work together with all the stakeholders in a holistic approach, we can tackle this problem together and identify, what is the best funding and the criteria to, reward these research. So with that, I will hand it back to Ying for our conclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Bing. Basically, I think, all of this we talk about, I think bring a level of question about what's exactly our role. I think we all talk about the legislation, and then we talk about the corporate responsibilities. So from the corporate perspective, I think a lot of companies are investing in renewable energy. They are really selecting new materials or developing new materials. And also, I've seen many big companies have published, material substance, restrictions for their suppliers and their own manufacturers to follow. And at the same time, I think for average consumers, what we can do. So I think those are the questions we can ask ourselves, and I would love to discuss, in the second part of, or the remaining part of our webinar with the audience. And having said all that, and last but not least, I think the corporate stewardship and commitment is super important. Recently we've seen Apple as the leading company that tied the ESG performance to the executive compensations. I'm hoping there will be more companies, I think, will do that, because I think on one side there's a will, there's a way. On the other side, I think we do what we are measured by. So thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Ying, and Bing as well. Great comments, great structure, great thoughts. We've already got a number of questions that have come in. John Verbancourt from our MSU College of Engineering is on and has posted a couple questions for us. And to kind of summarize them, I think they really get at two issues, right? The first is, how do we create the right economic incentives in the corporate environment to drive these types of sustainable goals and sustainable objectives, right? So many of us in supply chain management are really under pressure around cost and cost attainment goals. But how do we create that right incentive structure to move to more holistic, more resilient, more positive environments? Do you have any thoughts or comments on how we can do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question. We've been thinking about this. As I think Vendat actually pointed out, the variations in policy from country to country, from region to region, and from at least my experience, I've seen in some areas like Europe, they're talking about tax incentives. Tax incentives in terms of both incentives for tax reduction, at the same time, higher taxes for some consumption of the materials. So they're talking about like a plastic tax. In terms of if, I think we talk about the lack of infrastructure. So who is going to fund that, building the infrastructure that really come from the average people's tax dollars, or where it should, come from whoever consume that. So I think that's one thing people can look at in terms of the tax incentives. If the company truly invested in the materials innovations, and because it's going to take some funding and take time and take risk in particular. So whether or not those companies should be really rewarded for what they're doing. At the same time, for the companies who have been consuming the materials have not been able to fund the recovery, whether or not there should be some tax related to that. So I think we can look at both sides in terms of the incentives. At the same time, we also see there states, as we mentioned, the extended producer responsibility. So that's another way of looking at this is, shall we create a common pool of funding that, starting from, the top tiers and then the, down through the supply chain. So every company, whoever, being part of the sort of the carbon emission generators that can contribute to this fund, and then eventually we'll be able to really create more infrastructures. And there's a personal vision or hope that down the road, that when we talk about GDP, we're not just only measured by how much we output, but also we're going to be measured by how much we recovered.
That's very interesting. I like to share, switch gears a little bit, and maybe not everyone have heard of building on fire analogy. So when you talk about the regulation, the code of installing a sprinkler in a building, I think it's not in anybody's interest right away to do it uniformly. So it had to be required. But when the building is on fire, you would think, boy, I wish I have a sprinkler. Wish I have an alarm system. It's such small cost, and it's going to save, so much life, properties, etc. So I think there's always this threshold in terms of the materiality. There are some things, if it's a sprinkler analogy that is, easy for everyone to accept, I think that's something that we need to consider. On the other hand, if you take Tesla as an example, right, it had tremendous subsidies from government around the world to push the innovation forward. When it was building, for Tesla to be feasible, you cannot drive an electric car without infrastructure. And that was the biggest problem when the car started. People are saying, what if I get stranded and there's no gas station, there's no charging station? Charging station till this day and age is a money-losing business, but everyone is building a charging station. Government is building it. If you take Israel, it's definitely the #1 country in the world that had started to build a green city, many years ago. Actually, almost 10 years ago, that's when they started planning. And then if you look at Electrify America, EVgo, Blanc, all of these companies right now are, funding this money-losing business. Why? Because this is what we needed. This is the trend, and this is where this is going, right? And I think the lessons there is worth learning because they have carbon credit. At some point it will disappear, but that's another way of a government incentive to think about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate those comments, and it really speaks to some of the things that John is pointing out, which is right. How do we think about this beyond just an individual corporate responsibility, but make it more of a societal responsibility, right? Governments have a role, industry groups have a role, individual companies have a role. I think that becomes really pivotal to what you're talking about. We have to do investment to get the outcomes that we're looking for. So another question that's kind of come in is, as we think about design of supply chains, right? There are a lot of things we can do in the design of a supply chain to address these types of sustainable considerations. But and I think, Ying, you talked about it, right? It has to be part of that overall consideration set. But how do you have examples or other ways of how organizations have really kind of approached the supply chain design decision from a sustainability standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I will just take a packaging example because that's something we're very familiar with. So there are so many kinds of materials can be selected for packaging, least to say. Then I think the corporations really, need to think about what's the ultimate goal. There's definitely a fit function. There's a look, like branding type of requirements for packaging. But at the same time, whether or not disposal, the exit friendly, should also be taken into consideration. So when people come up with, I call the product requirement document, it's come back to, what's required to be to make a sustainable packaging, then the options are probably would speak for themselves already. And so what I see, I think even for a company like Apple, they choose fiber-based materials as the packaging materials. And I know Google and Microsoft, they tend to use fiber-based materials as well. Simply given, I think the chart I showed earlier today for the paper-related products that has much better recycling rate today, and it's actually universal anywhere is the case, and not necessarily in the US. So at the same time, it's a matter of the function, the fit, and also the design of supply chain in terms of where the product is being made, and then the packaging factory, in order to reduce the transportation time as well as the carbon emission during the transportation. So that's also something need to be considered as well. So I think, definitely to your point, David, I think cost has always been a key driver in many cases. There are so many meetings, we attended, like, the first question the procurement people ask will be, how much does it cost?
Cost.
That'd be a cost of premium to use some of the probably the newer materials. So I think it's also a good challenge for the packaging industry people to think about how to be able to maintain the cost, but at the same time to really make the product exit friendly, at the same time to really help recover some of these materials, use recovered materials or recycled materials.
Yeah, yeah, and that's interesting, Ying, because that's another question that has come in, right? Is this issue of making trade-offs, right, in the supply chain between different options, and you talked about reuse, but another topic that's closely related to this is remanufacturing, right? How can we bring product back and refurbish, upgrade, and put it back into the market? Do you have any experiences or any stories or examples of remanufacturing and places where that could be a positive contribution to driving greater sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are definitely a lot of case studies in terms of like even batteries. I think earlier today, Dr. Zhang talked about the cobalt as one of the conflict minerals. And we all know, I think giving the electronics, cobalt is one of the key elements in all the lithium batteries. And so if we look at the commodity pricing chart this year, actually cobalt price has already been increased by nearly 80% year to date. So I think that creates a great opportunity to look at, how we'll be able to recycle and reuse some of the minerals in the electronics as well as in the batteries. So I've seen a report recently saying like in China, the electronic cars has been in the market since about 6-7 years ago. So it comes to a cycle that a lot of these batteries probably come to end of life, and then people are creating a market and also expanding the capacities to recycle the batteries. So I think there are a lot of this kind of cases that we can go deeper as we have more time. But I think there will be a lot of success stories.
Excellent, excellent. So I appreciate all of the comments and observations today, right? And some key lessons that we've obviously talked about. Number one is we have to think about these issues through a holistic lens, right? We have to think about collaboration as a way to address and resolve many of these issues. And I think the frameworks and the ideas you've presented have been just really fantastic, and I think give us a lot to think about. What I'd like to end with is one last question, and I would open this up to Ying, you and Bing as well, and frankly Han or Vedant, if either of you want to offer a thought. If you had to offer one recommendation to a supply chain professional who may be listening to this webinar for something they could do positively to impact the future of supply chain sustainability, what would be that number one top priority thing that you would encourage people to do?
I can go first.
Go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I think my philosophy has always been starting with refuse and reduce. Even though we're in the packaging industry, but we have seen so many cases that the products are packaged. So I think if we can reduce the material consumption and reduce, for whatever purposes, the energy use or the water use in the manufacture, producing these packages, I think that will be a huge win for all of us. Yeah, so I would say I would encourage the practitioners to look at how we can refuse and reduce as a first priority.
Excellent, excellent, right? How can we do more with less? Great, great example. Anybody else have another one they'd like to offer up for our audience?
So I will take the second I think even though, a lot of our clients are actually in either the sustainability or in the supply chain management role. Not often they're together. Usually they're the separate department. So I would be, I think I would encourage people to reach across the aisle and ask the question there, what's your perspective, and show the money, do the calculation, and then to, get your point across.
I like that. Internal collaboration, find our key internal allies and partners and build the business case for doing something differently. Great advice.
I will follow up on Bing's very nice point, not to say that Ying's point wasn't very nice either, but I think Bing's point was sort of close to the page I am on, and I would suggest respectfully to the supply chain professionals to stop thinking about cost anymore. That's a huge mindset change, and to your supply chain as a basis of generating.
Oh, Vedat, your internet connection hung up on us, but I'm going to go out on a limb and finish his thought for him. That really what we need to do is shift that mindset in supply chain away from cost being the only value we're creating towards something that is more value laden with a broader understanding of where value comes from and what it can be. And so I think that's a great comment as well. Han, did you want to add anything else?
Well, I will just also follow up on Bing's nice comment, like work with other areas within your organization, and also in the spirit of what I covered today, consider working with other companies in the industry as well.
Yeah, industry alliances and collaboration.
Yes.
Absolutely, huge opportunity. Well, we've kind of reached the end of our allotted time for today's webinar, and I certainly want to thank Dr. Berter, Dr. Shang for your great insights, and obviously Ying Liu and Bing Cao, fantastic frameworks and great ideas for us all to think about. I think we probably could spend another several hours talking about these issues and carrying these things forward. I'm also really excited to let you know that if you'd like to hear more from Ying and Bing on some of their experiences, we have some executive education opportunities coming here from the Broad College of Business. Our annual Supply Chain Logistics Management Seminar coming up the first week of May, and our Purchasing and Supply Chain Management Seminar first week in June. And Ying and Bing have graciously offered to join us and share some of the additional thoughts on sustainability for those specific audiences. And so we hope that some of you will be able to join for those great experiences as well. And so on behalf of our panelists and everyone here today, I want to thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate you joining us for these webinars. Hope they are valuable for all of you. The recording of this will be posted again to the Broad College YouTube channel. And we hope all of you continue to remain healthy and safe as we continue to ride out this pandemic. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day.